Our museum is in Charleston, which many don't know was really the genesis story of African American history. We're building a museum on the spot where almost half of all the enslaved Africans who came to America disembarked, took their first steps. And so there's a real sacredness to the space that we are building this museum on. From an international standpoint, we want to talk about the international slave trade, about the fact of boats and the slave ships coming from England and being financed and getting folks from Africa, bringing them to the Caribbean, bringing them to America. We're going to talk about the diaspora. A good chunk of folks left here in revolutionary times, left Charleston, went to Nova Scotia, went to Canada, went back to the Caribbean, went back to Africa. So we're going to talk a lot about that. That's one element that makes this museum different. But then there are some others as well.
So how much will this museum cost?
It's a $75 million project.
And who's funding it?
It's a great question. It's funded a third, $25 million, by the city and the county, Charleston City and the county. We've asked the state of South Carolina for $25 million, and then there's $25 million in private fundraising that we're out in the middle of fundraising now.
And what's been the reaction so far from the state?
We've gotten $14 million of the $25 million, and we're in the process of completing the private fundraising before going back to the state for the remaining $11 million.
And obviously I mean, look, I've talked to folks with different museums all around the country, African American museums, and sustainability is one of those critical issues. And so when it comes to this one, give us a sense of its scope, its size, how large will it be? The complex is, multiple levels. Give us that perspective.
Yeah, it's one story, lifted 14 feet off the ground, in part in deference to the sacredness of the site and of what happened there. It's longer than a football field. It's long and narrow, 40,000 square feet. So it's not enormously large, but it's enough for us to tell the story, to pique the interest of people, and then to send them to other various museums around. We want to send them to Penn Center down in St. Helena. We want to send them to Georgetown, to the rice fields. We want to really help to tell the story, focusing on the role that Charleston and the Lowcountry played, because it really is such a fundamental role, particularly in colonial America. And we hope to break ground beginning of 2018, and it'll take a couple of years to build and before we can open.
When was this first conceived?
Actually, it's been going for about 15 years. The former mayor, Joe Riley, conceived of it, talked about it in the State of the City address back in 2000. And it's taken time to sort of build a political case for it and to certainly raise money. And over the last 4 or 5 years, it's really gained momentum, and we are really close now.
And obviously, for you, it's a lot personal because of your historical ties.
Yeah, it really is personal. My great-great-grandfather, well, even before that, my great-great-great-grandmother actually landed on the site. It's the former Gadsden's Wharf. It was the longest, the largest wharf in the colonies, and it was really, again, the epicenter of the transatlantic slave trade in terms of North America. It's where almost half of all the enslaved Africans arrived. So that's the start of it. And then her grandson, Robert Smalls, commandeered a Confederate boat. He worked in Charleston and had this vision to be free.
Worked as a slave or was free man?
He was enslaved. No, he was enslaved. Yeah, he worked on a boat, and that once the Civil War broke out, was sort of commandeered by the Confederacy into service of the Confederate Army. And he knew just outside the mouth of the Charleston Harbor was a federal blockade, a Union blockade, and that if he could get there, he would be free. And so concocted this plan, got his wife, the crew and their families, and one night when the Confederate crew left, went into town, he took off and made his way to freedom.
And later made his way to D.C.
He did. He first started off, as many politicians do, and joined or was elected to the school board down in Beaufort, South Carolina, but then was elected to the legislature, to the House, and to the Senate. One of the things that he did of note in the South Carolina legislature is he authored legislation to create the first free compulsory statewide school system actually in the country. So there were public schools, of course, but this was the first time that a state enacted a free public school system for all.
Well,
And then was elected to Congress after that.
And that's one of the things that I think I often talk about when I'm talking about school choice around this country, and people don't understand the role that African Americans made in terms of the South, in terms of public education. James D. Anderson breaks it down, the education of blacks in the South, 1860 to 1935, where he lays out in that particular book that role. And so, you know, people are running around talking about public education. Again, taxpayer financed public education, black folks made that possible.
Yes, sir. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think for him, it really pained him that he could not read and write as an enslaved person. One of the first things he did, he got a reward for delivering the boat, which was full of munitions and guns and the like, to the Union. He got a reward. The first thing he did was he hired tutors. At 5 o'clock in the morning, he had one session, and then later in the evening, and he taught himself to learn to read and write, and then he fought to extend that right to all.
Again, you spoke of $25 million from the city and county. You've gotten $14 to $25 million from the state. How much has been privately raised?
We're more than halfway there. So we've raised 13 million or so. We've got a lot of really great quality asks out there, and we're working hard to complete that fundraising.
All right,
effort.
so what's the website that folks want to give?
IAAmuseum.org, www.iaamuseum.org.
Okay, we'll certainly appreciate it. Michael, thanks a bunch.
Thank you.
All right.
All right.